The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 254.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library, the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book that will enable you to grow personally and professionally. Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Welcome back to the EL. We have a returning guest today, Carol Sanford, author of The Responsible Business. Welcome back, Carol, and thank you for joining us once again on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Well, I'm really happy to be here, Wade.
So for those that haven't listened to episode 12, where we take a deep dive into your book, The Responsible Entrepreneur, will you once again take a moment just to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you personally?
You betcha. And a couple of things have changed since then. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I joined the University of Washington, founding a center which is going to house my many, many decades of work under something called the Responsible Business Center. And I'm the founder, the CEO, well, so what do we call me? Director is my new title. I'm not used to things like that. And head of faculty. So that's pretty exciting. It's a partnership with Carol Sanford Institute, which has been partnering with other universities as well as corporations. I also work a lot with individuals now through some seed communities, I call them. And probably the only other thing that probably really matters here is I'm an author of 2 award-winning best-selling books. I have a few others which didn't win as many awards. And I, as a result, do a lot of keynote speaking, which I love. That probably gives enough of an overview.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So first off, thank you for sharing that. And now let's do what we're here to do. Let's jump right into your book that we're here to talk about today, and that's The Responsible Business.
Yes.
Which was made available, was it March of 2011 when it was originally made available for purchase?
Yeah, I think it was May, but yes, that year.
Okay, perfect. So May of 2011. And just like last time, Carol, we're going to move quickly, but our whole goal here today is to cover those top questions that the future reader, the listener here today has before they dive into a book. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing The Responsible Business?
Well, there were a couple. One was that I had been working with corporations for 25 years, and I maintained relationships with everyone I've ever worked with. I still am very close, even after many years. And they kept telling me I need to write a book and tell all those stories. And so I set out to do that. But what really triggered me finally sitting down and writing it is I was walking around Kepler's bookstore in Menlo Park one day, and I was looking at the table of business books, and every one of them had a separate subject. Like you could get a marketing thing, you could get something about accounting, you could do sales, but there was no sense of that there was one written from the mind of the CEO about a business as a whole. How does it all fit together? That's what this book is about. And I needed to make it a system so people could actually see if they were going to run a business or if they were going to move up to leading a business, they would understand the whole.
So you sort of answered number 2 a little bit, but I'll let you expand on it. And the question is basically what makes this book different from others regarding the same or similar topic. And again, you kind of briefly touched on it. Will you dive in a little deeper?
Yes, please let me give you just a little bit more. I think one of the real differences of this book is that it goes away from what I call the flatland view, where you just look sideways and you see a line staff chart, where mostly what you're aware of is all the lines on the chart. And everyone is developed in their functional role, or if you're an entrepreneur, you often entered as a technical expert or a product idea expert. This book is to help most really innovative, creative people back up and understand how would you lead so all that fit together. And what you really want is everyone in your business being able to do that, no matter whether they're an individual contributor or they're on their way to helping something greater. So it really gives you a systems view of a business and a non-fragmented view through stories. And these stories are from large, mid, and small businesses. So you've got the CEO of DuPont, who I worked with for 28 years, who became chairman, CEO, and president. You've got a mid-sized business like Seventh Generation. You've got a caterer who went from tiny in his own kitchen to now being the lead caterer in the Seattle area. And the fun thing is, these are intimate stories for me. I lived and worked with all of these people as a collaborator. So they're not interviews. They're someone who really knows what happened. And they're designed to give you that level of experience and understanding.
So, Carol, this next question, I don't believe I asked you the first time around. It's a little bit different. After speaking with David Allen he said this would be a great question to add. So this is, how did you design the book to be read? Is this a book that the reader can jump in, jump out, cherry picking ideas or thoughts, or did you really design it to be read from front to back?
Well, actually, this is really weird because I actually suggest people go to the very back, the last chapter, and read it first, because in some ways it gives you kind of the philosophical stance for the whole book. And then most people tell me that if you read the first 4 chapters, you then can move around. But until you've read the prologue, which is a case story of Procter & Gamble, who innovated most of the stuff businesses are doing now, even though we aren't aware of it, did this 60 years ago. It gives you that background. And I worked with many of the people very closely who were there. So you read that, you read the overview of the case stories so you can tell who people are, and then you get the structure of the book in the 3rd and 4th chapter, which is really shows you what the system is. Then you can move around because you'll say, oh, I know what the stories are. I know what the structure of the book is. So when I drop over here and you're telling me a bit more about Kingsford Charcoal, I remember them. So I think David Allen's question was a good one, and I don't think most books are written so you can jump in and out. Mine you can, as long as you get a little grounded at the front.
Excellent. You answered that perfectly. So, Carol, we're to my favorite part of the entire interview, and this is where I want to hand over the mic to you, give you the next 5 to 8 minutes, and allow you to give the listener, the future reader, a great idea of what your book is all about. So, will you take the next couple of minutes and do that?
I will. All right. As I say, this book is really fun for me because I live and know it, and what it's really about is a way to have people experience what I'd say is a pretty radically different way of doing business. Let me give you a story of or a metaphor of that, and then I'll give you a little more detail as we go down into it. But can you imagine if you went into a laboratory in biology and someone said, here's a living frog, watch it jumping around. Now put it in the jar, put chloroform on it. Now cut it up in pieces. And then you say, okay, now I want it to hop. The frog can't hop once you've cut it apart, but that's exactly what we do to a business. So we have people become so functionally driven, so broken apart into pieces. We even take the initiatives, we even take the strategy, and we make lists of them, and we have different people responsible for them. And then we're very surprised when you can't create alignment and create something that works well. The other thing is that we create in that same dissected frog way the people who might be called stakeholders to a business. Investors are like somebody different from customers, and we have to figure out how we trade off one for the other is what it feels like all the time. And then you have a view of being an upstanding citizen and wanting Earth to be healthy and the communities to be healthy, and we treat those as though they are independent processes. And then the same thing with people we hire. Employees are working hands, and suppliers are even further away. There's so much energy put into looking at each of those with separate departments and functions. This book had the intention of having you understand how it all works together. So let me do a visual description so you can draw it in your mind, and then I'll show you how it fits together. So if you draw a star in your mind, then a 5-pointed star, and you go to the top of it, my star has a point up on top and 2 legs it can stand on the bottom. On the top, you would write the word customer. And for me, it is getting even businesses that are working on what they might call sustainability or responsibility, saying the responsibility actually starts with what it is you create. It's the life of the customer. Now, one of the things that's really different about my book is I don't want anyone looking internal as a way to start or measure. I want them going out into the life of the consumer. So, for example, in Kingsford Charcoal, they spent a lot of time on grills outside of all the facilities, even the strategy. I took the executives outside and said, I want you to bring a bunch of folks from the community, and I want you to barbecue for them. You live like that for a while. You start to talk about them. What's their life like? What really matters when you're barbecuing? And they'll start to tell you, well, the big thing is, it's kind of a macho thing. And I really need to look like, when I tell somebody I can give them a medium rare burger, I can do that. And I can get a steak to exactly the right temperature. I want you to design a business based on that experience of knowing what that life is like. Same is true actually for the distributor. If Costco is going to distribute, you've got to go be in their warehouses. So I did that with all the stories in the book. We start on the outside with the customer. Then we move down on our pen tab to the lower right-hand side where I call it the co-creators. Now, that's a big mind shift because it's not employees and it's not supply and it's not supply chain. It is all of the people who are co-creating from earth all the way out to when it ends up in the home or on the plate or in the car or in the stereo for someone, how it is that they're bringing into existence that customer's life. And the thing we work on here is tying the co-creators directly to the customer, not to their supervisor, not to their direct measures for the company, but to their measures for the external satisfaction of customers. And in there, I talk about creating something like promises beyond ableness, so that everyone in the company commits to do something for the customer that'll change their life. And then they're given authority, they're given capability, and they're given funding after quite a bit of other stuff that has to go on, which I described. Then you go ask the question about Earth, which is part of my next leg on this pentad. The Earth, not the Earth, Earth has an agreement with us to use resources as long as we use them at a rate at which she can replenish them. Otherwise, you run out. Rivers run dry, fish run out. Then you move across to looking at how community fits again. Now, let me remind you, the point you're tying all this to is the customer. So you now have the co-creator here asking, how do we work with Earth to serve the customer but keep Earth healthy? How do we work with communities to keep them unique? How do we build leaders in those communities with how we work? Now, the interesting thing to me and what I really show, I think without question, my book has all 5-star reviews, all of them. That tells you a lot about how different this book felt. And you read the reviews, people say, this just switched my mind. It took me a long time to understand that if you start with the customer and then you tie everything to that, you're going to get in a much different place. And then the last stakeholder is investor. And they get an enduring return where it, without question, they can only get that if the customer stays with them over and over again. Now, there's one other fun thing I do in the book, which is I talk about why we tend to spin this thing backwards. So if you still got the pentad in your mind and you start to imagine you're starting down in the lower left-hand corner with the investor, and then what will happen, and I give you a story of this. DuPont was doing this in Australia. They were taking down 90% of every mountain that they went after for titanium. And that ore-based product, once we started investigating, found that it was undermining community health. Earth obviously was being destroyed. The people who were working there were getting sick. And slowly they were getting a more degraded commodity product back to the customer. So that's what I call going backwards. You start with the investor and you end up undermining everything on the way. So the book is about this system of how, if you start with the customer and you really stand in their shoes and in their life, and you get the co-creators standing in their shoes in their life, understanding how Earth is a partner with the people who are making it, and so are communities. If you get that nature of working, you will get an amazing return. So, for example, all the stories I give you and all of my clients end up in the first 5 years with a 30 to 65% revenue increase. Much of that gets converted over into margin increases, and of course, it gives you a long-term profitability, because profits and earnings for long-term are more about, are we living in a way people can read how well we're doing, read as in make sense of, and therefore they trust us to stay invested in us. But it's also true for the folks who are not publicly held, they're privately held, but they have the same stability. So it's a system that produces financial effectiveness. It also becomes one of the best places to work, and you deeply embed responsibility in it from beginning to end. How's that for an overview?
That is phenomenal. You did an excellent job. And Carol, as you remember from last time, now we ask the difficult question of taking it even a step further. So if your reader could only take away one concept, principle, or action item out of your entire book, everything you just discussed with us, what would you personally want that to be?
I think it's a paradigm shift of going from the idea of breaking things down into smaller and smaller parts, which fragments. We're back to our frog. Remember, you can't cut up the frog and still have it hop and croak and, make those beautiful noises at night. That you start to think and know everyone who works there can think from the mind of the CEO if they have a framework, which gives them a system out of which they can understand how it all works together.
That's huge. And that's actually, there's that seems like one giant quote, but that's actually our next question as well, which is, do you have a favorite quote from your book, something that you wrote that has resonated with the audience? And will you take a minute to explain what it means to you?
Yes. Right now I'm creating a second sub-book out of this that AHA Amplifier takes 140 characters and puts it into 140 Twitter comments. And so I'm going to give you one of those that shows up most often, which is be value adding and not value added. Now, it's a bone that I'm trying to pick here, because the work that Procter & Gamble did originally was called value adding processes. And you think about ing on the word end of a word versus ed, one is alive and one is fixed. But the other thing is, when the guys came and studied Procter & Gamble, I think they were deaf. I haven't figured out but they went back, the guys at Harvard who went to study, and said, oh, they're doing something called a value-added process. And what that means is you put in your part and then you get your money back. So that is like an extractive view. The word value adding means every time I make something on this line, or every time I create this service, or every time I code something, I am thinking about the person who's going to use it. And I am investing value into it for their life to be impacted and changed, not I am putting something in so I can extract my part out. I think that's why people love it.
Yeah, that's absolutely huge. And Carol, we're going to put that in the show notes at the elpodcast.com. So a lot of these listeners can go back and reflect on that further. And so we're down to our final question, which is going to step away from your book, but it's basically, and you were talking about paradigm shifts earlier, which is huge for me. I'm always looking for that next nugget, that next paradigm shift. So if there was only one book you could recommend based on the way that it's impacted your life, created a paradigm shift or a lifestyle shift, what book would you suggest?
Well, I guess the reason I would say I'm going to recommend to you The Starfish and the Spider by Ori Brofman and Rod Beckstrom is not so much because it changed my life as much as it gave me a lot of reference material I could show people this crazy mind I had, and when I was trying to get them to see what I wanted to see. And it gave a logic. I mean, they wrote a great book that lets you understand that the starfish is a regenerative creature, which many of your readers probably know, that if you break off an, I forgot what they call them, you can't call them arms, although we usually do, that it will regenerate, but it's never identical to what was before. It changes based on the environment that it's in and what it takes for it to be healthy. Where the spider, if you chop off anything, it does not grow back. And that we build organizations with a head of them like we're going to be just like the spider and can't be regenerated. So I recommend this book, and I've been recommending it for years. I can't even remember when it was published, but it's probably 7 or 8 years old now.
That's fantastic. We've actually had it once or twice recommended in the last 250 plus episodes. But I appreciate that book recommendation. And Carol, before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to, not only get more information on you, but also get more information on your book?
Yeah, there are 2 websites I have. I actually have 3, but let's do 2. CarolSanford.com tells you a lot more about me and my speaking and the books. CarolSanfordInstitute.com, and that's CarolSanford, Institute, all one word, .com, is more about the application of this work. So you can learn, you can see where there's more inspiring stories and instructional stories, and what different companies have said is they've taken on this very different way of running a business. So I invite you to check both of those out. And if there's a whole set of things about my speaking schedule too, if people want to show up or they want to hire me to come speak.
Carol, you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for coming on here today and sharing your book with us.
Well, I'm glad to do it, Wade. Thank you so much for asking. And I have a new book, The Responsible Human, out in the spring.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Well, we will definitely be reaching back out to get additional information on that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you'd like more information on Carol or her book, The Responsible Business, check out the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea? Head over to the elpodcast.com, where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free. That's the elpodcast.com. Till the next time, keep it on the EL.